Right, now on to our second session. So I'm delighted to be joined by Sophie Ward, a highly acclaimed author, writer, and all-round great person. So thank you very much for joining us, Sophie. Before we talk about the nitty-gritty of your books and where we are at the moment, tell us about the last 16 months, how the pandemic has affected you and your family.
Yes, well, like everybody, it's been a very different 18 months, hasn't it? But I think I'd just finished on I was acting and I was doing a tour of The Exorcist shortly before we finished, which was a very strange play to be doing, and I was fine with stopping doing that. So the beginning of lockdown, we had that beautiful weather. That was all nice, and my book had just come out in February 2020, and then we went into this whole weird time of not knowing what was happening. Obviously all the theatres closed, we weren't filming at all, and I know a lot of other writers found it then quite difficult to start a new project because their brain was so filled with what was going on in the world and what we were going to do. And I mean, I don't know, it sort of felt like the apocalypse at the beginning, didn't it? Because it was just like, well, are the lights going to go off? Is the water? Nobody knew what was happening. So I think people felt distracted and obviously anxious, and there were all kinds of things. People were ill, obviously, as well. I was lucky that I'd got a draft of my next book. So in some ways that's easier to do the rewriting because it's already there. You've got something that's already sort of hewn roughly, and then you're fine-tuning it more, rather than having to start with the blank page and go back to the beginning. So I spent most of lockdown reworking my next novel, which is coming out next year. So I was lucky work-wise, and then now we're back to filming. I had my youngest son, who's 28, living with us, and I missed my grandchildren, who are 3 and 4, but just now we're getting back into seeing them again.
Yeah. And how much did your day-to-day sort of discipline change? Because before lockdown, many people might have been in sort of a Monday to Friday routine, but did you find that you changed the way you were working? Were you writing at different periods? Did you kind of have blocks?
Well, as an actor, I've got a very strange schedule anyway. Mostly I do a lot of theatre, so that's a sort of nighttime thing, and your whole day is just geared towards being at the theatre at the right time and having the right amount of energy to do that show. And then afterwards, you've got all this energy, you can't go to bed for ages. So I have this weird, and my partner is a playwright, so she also spends a lot of time writing all night, and so we have this quite nocturnal existence anyway. So lockdown didn't really affect that, and also our weeks aren't Monday to Friday usually. So I love writing outdoors, so last year was so wonderful to be able to be, I've got a little garden, was to be able to be outside and I do a lot of staring into space, and I could do that and take my computer outside, and that was sort of ideal for me, really.
And you said that you normally write outdoors, so not being able to maybe go to a cafe or other outdoor places, was that quite restrictive?
Yeah, it was. I think I did really enjoy being quite isolated, though, and maybe it was helpful for my concentration. It was quite helpful. There wasn't so much distraction about other things I should be doing, which we all have. So I was all right with that. Although it is lovely to be able to go out and see people again.
And you said that you had your draft to work on anyway, so that kept you going. But for many writers, particularly those starting out, it would have been an incredibly difficult time for them. With theatre stopping and kind of that side of your career kind of at a halt, did you find that you picked up more writing projects, or you decided to maybe delve into a different world because you had the time to?
Well, no, I mean, I'd got this book and the next book, so I've got another 2 books to write for the same publisher that's published my first novel. So it was all quite organised in that sense. And also I went back to school in my 30s, and then for 15 years went to school because I had a very mixed education as a child. So I finished my PhD just before like at the beginning of last year. So that was also freed up a lot of my brain, because I'd been doing various degrees for all that time, as well as working. So it was quite a sort of nice feeling to then just be able to concentrate on the books that I already wanted to write.
And being an actor, I mean, that's been a huge part of your life from a very young age, and I guess the writing's come a bit later. How much has, acting helped shape your writing? Because there is a crossover between the two industries, isn't there, so to speak?
Yeah, there is. It's funny because obviously the end results are so different and the actual working process is different, but they're both telling stories and using their imagination. And the way that I write is very much the same way that I would approach building a character, which is to think about who they are, where they are, what they're doing and thinking and feeling, what they might be wearing. When you walk into a room, what are you seeing and hearing and all of those things. So the approach is similar, and I think actors definitely think in terms of scenes and dialogue as well. Of course, plotting and everything like that is a very different exercise. As an actor, you don't have to do that. You're given that bit of it. So yeah, I mean that's work. That's the tough bit
Just
of
on
the
that
job.
note, what's easier, kind of writing the character or the plot for you? Because I mean, sometimes it can become a battle for some authors, because they are so invested in their characters, and then that could then shape or dictate the plot in some ways.
Yeah, ideally there's a synergy, and the plot is led by the characters, and they should fit together. They shouldn't really be a battle between them. But I know that sometimes I've heard authors saying, my character wanted to do this and I didn't want them to do that, because and that does sort of take over a bit. But what you want for the reader is to feel that is what would happen, that's what those people would do, and that's the direction it would go. I think that's the most satisfying way of it evolving. Yeah.
Let's go back to your first book, The Marriage Proposal. That was published 7 years ago. So much of that, I guess, has been shaped by your own personal circumstances. You are an active LGBTQ campaigner, you continue to be. Why was it important for you to really approach that subject and explore something that some people still find quite difficult to talk about?
Well, so my partner and I, we got together in 1996, and at that time there was absolutely no possibility of the idea of ever being able to be legally married. That was sort of totally off the cards. We still had Section 28, and it was a very difficult time. And then things started to get a bit easier, and my wife's American. Obviously it's difficult with immigration but there was a scheme that the government had, and gradually things freed up a bit. And then at about 2000, we just wanted to celebrate, because getting together had been difficult, and being together had been sort of like a bit of a struggle to organise everything. And so in 2000, we thought, well, let's have a commitment ceremony, and let's invite all our friends and family, people who've been supportive and kind to us as a couple, and let's do it about love and also our love for each other, but also all the people who had loved us and been so kind. So we had a party, we had a commitment ceremony, and we had a Unitarian minister, and we think of that as our wedding. That was in 2000, but at the time, even civil partnership was still 10 years away. So that was a lovely experience, and after that, we did feel married. 10 years later, we had civil partnership, and so we then had another party and got our civil partnership. And then this idea of being able to be married. Now, I think some people still don't quite understand why that was a big distinction, but, and loads of people don't even want to ever get married, whether they're gay or straight, but you can't decide not to get married until the opportunity is offered to you. So it felt like it's fine to say, I don't ever want to get married, but in fact, you're just being told you can't get married. So when the government said you can convert it or upgrade it to a married, but they'd still wanted it to be very much just you send off a form like getting a television license. So I wanted to explain why I felt it was important. Our culture and our literature, our poetry, everything is so geared towards expressing love and commitment to each other through a marriage. And it felt very important to me personally that I'd like to do that, but also that people should have the opportunity to do that, and that it would just be fine. And I know, obviously, you'll remember that some of the debates was sort of quite horrific. But everything's been, as far as I know, everything's been fine. And The Guardian asked me to write a book. It was a bit of a cri de coeur, a bit of a sort of plea from the heart of, like, I really feel strongly about this and I want to explain some of the reasons why. And how other countries, some very Catholic countries, for instance, managed to do it before we did, by separating church and state. And we're in a different situation in the UK, obviously, because we have the established Church of England. So all those triple lock systems had to be put in place and things. But to me, it was very important that happened, and then it did. And we went ahead and we had another wedding. I promised all my friends we wouldn't have any more weddings, so they've been lovely, but I think they were done by then.
You said there it has been a journey. I mean, the fact that marriage, same-sex marriage, was legalised in 2014 in England and Wales. I mean, some people would find it hard to believe that it took this country so long to get to that place. And you mentioned earlier about it was tricky. You've had, I'm sure, many challenges. How much did that play into kind of your thinking behind the research and the elements feeding into your work at that point?
Well, I mean, it's interesting, and I there's so many things that I understand about why it took a long time, because. And I think sometimes it's good, you don't want everything suddenly to change, because these are very important matters, and it's right that there should be discussion and debate about things that are so sort of built into our society and who we are and how we define ourselves. And I was totally understood. In fact, what then it suddenly seemed to be quite quick. Suddenly, there was from civil partnership to marriage was actually just those few years. So, and that was very important. But yes, the journey of that for me personally was huge and very liberating, to be able to be myself. Things that I didn't really know about myself, obviously, when I was first growing up, and also to be able to communicate that with other people, and hopefully sort of take some of the stigma out of things, and just be able to talk about it. And I still get nervous sometimes. I often say partner instead of wife if I think, is that going to be too confrontational? I still sometimes pull back, and I sort of have to give myself a bit of a.
But on that bit, I mean, it's interesting what you say there, because even though it seems as if we have come so far forward, there are, you still sometimes have to think twice about what you say, and attitudes depending on where you are, and it's still something that you carry with you. And I'm wondering whether have you been affected by some of the hurtful comments or the debates, because it was controversial at the time when the law was being passed. Whether it be by religious groups or people with particularly strong opinions. How did you grapple with that, kind of emotionally being affected by what you were hearing, attitudes towards gay people, and then having to put that, down on paper and, sort of process that? Yes.
I mean, sometimes people think because I was in the public eye in a small way, and the media made a bit of a fuss in the 90s, they think that was very upsetting, but actually that I didn't really care about that. Obviously, work-wise, it was difficult as an actor, but the things that were important was how my family were going. How was I going to tell my grandmother? Those sorts of things was much more challenging than what complete strangers might say or think. There's the other side of it, as an anonymous person walking down the street and thinking, can I hold my wife's hand? Those sorts of things are always going to be in the back of your mind. There's very few places where you feel like, I feel completely safe here and I can just be exactly who I want to be. But yes, you learn to live with those things. You build it into your consciousness. And then, you know, I mean, we are hopefully not sliding back. I know that there are some, there have been quite a few hate crimes more recently, but I feel that on the whole, generally, especially in the UK, that we're making great strides forward. Yeah.
And at the time, how many other same-sex couples or friends did you know, and did you draw on their experiences?
I didn't know any.
No, so
No.
you were kind of almost...
I mean, I had gay male friends, you know, who I met and worked with in the industry, but I knew very few lesbians, and there were not very many, in fact, lesbian actresses who were out, and so there were a lot of people telling me not to do it. You know, it's a really bad idea, don't come out, and it's your private life, and people don't need to know. I do understand that up to a point. If I felt like, oh, I would never, if I had a husband or a boyfriend and I was never going to talk about them because I was so private that I never would, but that wouldn't be the case. Nearly everybody mentions their boyfriend or their husband, or their opposite sex partner. So I was like, well, that would just be very hypocritical of me. And also I knew from my own experience that I'd been unhappy. I couldn't imagine a life anyway with that sort of secret. But I knew that I'd been unhappy, and I imagined that there were other people out there who also might be unhappy and who might benefit from the idea. Because as I said, I hardly knew anybody, and the feedback that you got from especially newspapers was like always so negative, you know, and it was sort of all embarrassing and shameful, and it just seemed so silly. So I really, really wanted to help that not be the case. You know.
And I guess, you know, you said you had very few people in a similar situation to you, and of course you had your wife as a big support, but in terms of researching for your book, I mean, were there any other, you know, were there works that you could, you know, read into?
You mean by the time I wrote Marriage Proposal?
Yes.
Oh,
yeah.
By then I had lots of friends.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right.
Because that was years later, and we'd been together, and I, you know, found my community and my other family and everything. So yeah, no, that was a whole different situation.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
Brilliant. Let's talk about your second book. This was published last year, and the subject, you know, really kind of, again, love. Again, just an enormous topic to deal with. And where did the inspiration come for that?
Well, it was part of the PhD I was doing. I was looking at these little thought experiments which they use as stories. Philosophers use them, or lots of different sciences use them. But they're really just ways of using the imagination to look at a particular problem that might not be ever to be able to be physically reproduced. So Galileo was used them. Einstein had his moving trains where he could imagine relativity, like you were on a train, and there was lots of ideas about these, and sort of a mythology that had grown up about them. So you have these things called philosophical zombies, and you have these other planets where it's just like here but just slightly different, and what would that mean, and what does that mean about consciousness, because we know so little still about consciousness and how our brains work, and this thing called the hard problem, which is where the physical brain matter might produce a mind, and what that is, and whether we have one, whether it's separate from our physical bodies in some way, if you call that a soul, or just your consciousness, or if it's just embodied. All those things that are very interesting to me. I find them absolutely fascinating. I think we all do, really, about what this essential quality of us is and whether it exists, because it's very popular now to say there is nothing there. It's just a sort of homunculus. It's something that's been created by your brain in order to help you feel as an individual and live your life and function. But actually, it's not separate, and you know, we don't have minds or consciousness, which seems very counterintuitive to me, and not what I really think of as our experience. And then I think, well, if there is nothing there, and there is no consciousness, and we don't have a mind or a soul, but we feel we do, then that's the important thing. We feel we do, and that's our lived experience, and that's what matters in our lives.
And it's an interesting premise for your book, you know, weaving kind of those deep philosophical questions with the stories. Was it quite difficult to write that? I mean, because you're kind of thinking about so much, like lots of, you're pulling together lots of different strands, and, you know, sort of, you know, developing that into a...
Yes, well, I mean, I had this sort of structure, which I found the 10 experiments, thought experiments that I liked and that were the most discussed often in philosophy. So I sort of already had this, like, wet frame, which was very, very helpful, because then I was just looking at each story. Then I got my characters and my family, and I had that moment where I was like, oh, well, I can look at every single different story with a different point of view from all of these different characters, and that was a great liberation. I didn't have to just go from A to B. I could look at all the same basic story, but look at it from all different points of view in this family, which was really great fun, actually.
And how involved is your family with, you know, sort of, you know, reading and, you know, kind of getting their feedback and perspective on, you know, like a chapter you've written or a section that you kind of want looking over? Do you kind of take on board their comments? And
I wouldn't share it with anyone in my family except for my wife. She's also a writer, and she is a great support, and has a very good ear. So we share stories and we share our process, but no, that's it. I wouldn't nobody else until I've got a pretty good first draft.
And your route into publication, how has that been? Has it been a fairly, you know, kind of easy ride?
No, not easy at all. I didn't have a literary agent for a long time. When I was doing a marriage proposal, I didn't have a literary agent, and then all through my PhD at Goldsmiths, I didn't have one. By that time, I decided I wouldn't approach anybody till I'd finished this book. Then I sent it out to a few people. There was a couple. I was lucky that I was working with literary. I was going to book readings, and I had entered a few competitions, a bit like this one, and so I'd started to meet a few people. And also I read audiobooks as part of being an actor. And I was in the studio one day and I was reading an audiobook, and the author brought her agent, and the agent seemed really lovely, and I loved the book as well. And I said, would you ever be interested in me? And she said, yes, absolutely. And so I sent it out to a few people, including her, and she responded positively and then agreed to represent me. Then when we sent the book out, I mean, there was a lot of nice replies. There's also a lot of sort of, no, what would we do with this book? Because it's an odd book. It's not a genre. A lot of people were just like, oh, we love the book, but we took it to marketing, and marketing just said, well, where would we put it, and how would we sell it? And so, yeah, there was all those old cliches that people say about, you know, it wasn't something that everybody went, oh, right, yes, we know exactly what we're going to do with this. So there was several months of lovely but no, and then the list gets smaller and smaller. I don't know if anybody else here is a writer who has always had that experience of sending things out, that, you know, your possibilities become more. And then luckily Sarah Castleton, who is my editor at Corsair, read it and liked it and bought it, and they've been amazing since then. So I'm going to stay with them. Yeah, and that was just such a relief, really, because I spent 5 years writing the book, so you know you really hope it's going to find a home somewhere.
And just going back to that, I mean, because so many writers, they have to deal with rejection and, you know, kind of waiting an awful long time. They may not even be published. But I guess, you know, from your acting experience, you know, castings you may not necessarily get the job you were hoping for.
Yeah.
I guess you have to have a tough skin, and your resilience is really built up.
Yeah, you'd think so. I definitely thought, oh, I'm so used to rejection, because I started work as an actor when I was 10, and I thought, you know, that's going to be a breeze. I absolutely know what it's like for people to say. But it's different, because as an actor, you can often say, it's usually, well, they say, we're going in a different direction. And usually that's true. It's not usually somebody who's just like you, who does the part that you went up for. It is usually somebody slightly different. You can understand, you know, why that they chose that person, not you. But with your book, it's just you. There's no other alternative. There's nobody to hide behind. There's no reason. It's just no. And then also the critical reception I wasn't prepared for. This, when you do a play or a film, there's a few reviews in a newspaper or online. When you do a book, you've got every single reader on Amazon telling you what they think. I mean, it's quite overwhelming. So I don't really read the reviews because I think it's just so much to have in your head. Yeah.
You just completely cut yourself off.
I do. I mean, obviously there were a few newspaper reviews and sometimes the equivocal ones are actually quite helpful because there's always a bit of a Groucho Marx thing, isn't there, where you think if a review's really good, you think, oh well, you know, obviously they're just very nice people, and you don't listen so well. But sometimes the ones that are a bit like, well, this worked and then this didn't work for me, and you think, okay, yeah, and that seems sort of reasonable and proportionate. I guess you're used to people, you know, you're used to a B+. That I can cope with that.
And your next book is you're due to go on tour in America. Is it this year?
No, that's this one.
Right.
Yeah, this is just. I was lucky that they're bringing it out in the States, and that comes out in September. So it's quite a long. Everything's so slow, isn't it, in publishing? So, but yes, that's coming out in September, and I will have finished hopefully this next book. So I can just go and enjoy talking about this book.
And your next book, The Storehouse, can you tell us a bit about that? Kind of, any spoilers?
A little bit. Yeah, it's similarly multi-timelined, but the world is smaller. It's in London. It's set in the 70s and the 90s, and it starts in a school, and you get to know this girl in her diary as a child, and then as an adult you see how her past catches up with her, and things don't go very well.
And have you thought about any of your books maybe being turned into productions? Have you had any approaches for that, or
well, people talk about it. I mean, this one's difficult. I don't know if anyone here's read it, but because it's so got different perspectives, and also part of it is set on a small moon off Mars, and part of it is seen from an ant's point of view. So it's not your regular adaptation. So I would love it to be adapted because it's 10 stories, and I think 10 episodes with the different things would be really interesting. But I maybe have to be the one who writes that adaptation.
Yeah. And what's next for you? I mean, have you got any, in terms of the theatre, any other film or TV roles coming up?
Yeah, I've been filming. We're never allowed to say what we're filming. And I mean, I feel a bit like a spy sometimes nowadays. Even before you meet a director now, you get a long non-disclosure agreement that you have to sign and fax back, scan back. But yeah, so there's been some nice projects that will come out next year. One thing I can talk about, I just did, because I don't think I signed an NDA for this, which is Agatha Raisin. Do you know that show? It's a lovely show, so we just did one of those, which was really nice because they film it in Gloucestershire, and we're both...
Yes, indeed. We had this conversation before. I grew up in Gloucester. You lived there for a very long time in Gloucestershire. Yeah, and you must be really pleased to kind of be emerging out of, this pandemic and getting back to normal, being, part of book festivals again, being back on the stage. Yep.
I really missed that last year. I was really looking forward to going to festivals and talking about books and being with book people and all that. So I was sorry to miss that. I feel a bit ambivalent about the rest of the undoing of lockdown. I quite liked just pottering about. And the much slower pace of life, and I'm finding a lot more social anxiety, not to do with COVID, but just to do with interacting with people and thinking, did I make any sense just then when I was talking to that person, or did I?
Same way,
yeah, and they get feeling a bit more worried about, did I put my foot in it? And then, you know,
it's like overthinking, isn't it?
Yeah.
Every time you go somewhere, have I done this, this and this?
Yeah.
And, yeah, reflecting a bit too much.
Yes.
Have you been able to read more over the last year or so than you normally would do previously?
I wouldn't say more. I know some people felt that they couldn't read at all. That their brain just wasn't doing that. I was reading, but I wouldn't say that much more. And I was listening to audiobooks a lot as well, which I do like. And then I also had to built a little studio at home so that I could record audiobooks at home, because that was the one thing as an actor that I still could do. So between writing and reading and then going into my basically...
Oh, sorry. That's...
Yes, there was a lot of books going on.
Yeah. And any recommendations? Books, any really...
I've just started in The Dream House, which had amazing reviews and is quite a tricky book, but it's very dense, so I'm really enjoying that. I read Small Pleasures by Claire Chambers. I don't know if you know that. I'm really excited to read, is it Sorrow and Loss, the Meg Mason, I think? Does anybody recognise that? Sorrow and... something like that. Anyway, that seems... lots of people who I know and trust have read it and said that they love that. So,
and any advice for any new writers here? You know, starting out, especially as we're coming out of this pandemic and trying to get used to a different world now.
Yeah. Well, I mean, just don't give up. That's really the thing. And there's a really good podcast that's about people who are getting rejected and how their early works got rejected. And I think that is really helpful to listen to, because it's Francesca Steele who does the podcast. It's just so reassuring to listen to the stories of people. I mean, they nearly all are people who did eventually go on, so it's slightly a sort of self-selecting group, but you do get to hear how difficult it was. And I'm so full of admiration of people who have written one book, sometimes two or three, that haven't got accepted, and then keep going and then write another one, and then maybe they will go back to their other books that didn't get accepted before. But that that process, because it's so hard if you've taken all that time and creative effort and written something. And also the hardest thing to battle is your own voice telling you it's not good. And going into a bookshop and seeing all these amazing books and thinking, well, what do I have to offer that's different or can in any way compete with all these incredible authors?
Going through phases like that.
Yes.
How much do you, how do you deal with writer's block and, kind of maybe not feeling as motivated or inspired to sit down?
It is the plodding on and writing on the days where you don't necessarily feel like it, even if it's not something huge. I'm not one of those, some people... On Twitter, you see thousands. I did thousands of words today, and I just find that mind-blowing and amazing if you are that person who can do that. I'm not that person. I'll probably write a few hundred words and then delete 200 of them. So it's very, very slow progress for me. But just doing something, engaging with it, engaging with your work is something. Do you write, Adina?
I don't. I write scripts for work.
Right.
Not like you. On that note, I think the mic's also maybe given me a hint to wrap up. Any questions from the audience?
I have a couple, if that's okay.
Sure.
How did you feel when your first novel was longlisted for the Booker? And do you sense a change in the way people feel about you, address you, and the roles you've been offered? People, do you think, more intimidated somehow?
No, I don't think anybody's intimidated. I hope not, anyway. But it was just wonderful to be nominated, and incredibly exciting and quite life-changing, really, because you do think when you're finally got to that place where your book's going to come out, but you're very well aware it just might disappear without trace. There's so many books. Books come out on a Thursday, and your book comes out with all the other books that are coming out that Thursday, and only a few of them will get any traction where people are even aware that they exist. So to have that long listing was amazing and sort of slightly surreal as well. I mean, obviously, it definitely helped sell more world rights, so I've got more books in translation, and also I'm sure that it was nice for Corsair to be able to say, well, we'd like to keep you with us, you know, because there's that sort of validation, I suppose, which is awful, of course. A book is a book, but these things do matter because it's a busy place, the book world. Yeah, you're a writer.
I'm a journalist.
Ah.
I mean, I'm not doing this, I'm not really doing it. And I wonder if you've ever read a book called Sun by David Ivinghoe. He's a mathematician.
No.
And it's there are several, I don't know how many stories, it's about 15 stories about his different ideas about the afterlife and coming at it from different perspectives. I haven't read your book yet. I'm really looking forward to reading it, but I know that one of it is done from the perspective
Pascal
of
Swayze.
and I think you'd really enjoy reading Sun. I just wanted to say.
Thank you.
It's a little book, and I don't know if anyone here's read it, but it's absolutely fascinating.
Great, thank you. It's a good recommendation. Thank you.
Had you always wanted to write, or what kind of got you into writing in the first place?
Well, my dad was an actor, and my sister and I used to go on his travels with him, which often meant that we were the only children on set. He did a film several films in different parts of Africa, and we went to America and all around Europe. And often, you know, lovely. We were staying in a hotel, or they'd rented a house, but we were the only children, so we were entertaining each other. Obviously, there'd be no television. And obviously no internet or anything. And so one of the ways, she's slightly younger than me, one of the ways I would entertain her is by writing stories. And, you know, we'd develop these stories together and I'd write them down. And I had a couple of friends who were booky like me. I loved reading. I didn't go to a proper school that had classes and lessons and things, but we did learn how to read. And so that was a big part of my life. If I've always got a book with me, then it's like a friend with me. And we used to do like secret little book club meetings, and a friend had a little like under the stairs thing we used to go into, and we'd all like have booky. So yes, I had always wanted to write, but I didn't ever imagine that I would get to that place until about 15 years ago when I started to take it more seriously. And after I did an Open University degree and then went and did an MA in creative writing. So, yeah.
Great. Any more questions?
I was intrigued by your skipping reference to a mixed education.
Yes.
You've explained it a little bit by having to travel to Africa and North America and stuff. I myself went to 6 different primary schools and then went an atypical route to university. Often wondered if I was from a different planet, because you're faced with bullying and all sorts of stuff. Did that have a bearing on you then developing the approach, you know, you see the world from the perspective of an ant, or Mars or somewhere?
Yes. Well, probably it did. I mean, I was at one of those experimental schools in the 70s. And then, I wasn't there very much. And then I also then started working myself when I was quite young. So, yes, I missed out on a lot of the more conventional lessons. And then I often didn't know what people were talking about when I did go to school. And
my sight was fading as well, so
I
hadn't got a clue what was going on sometimes.
right. And did you have any support for that at school?
No.
No.
Well, because I was only there 6 months or something, and then moved on to different schools.
Were your parents in the armed forces?
No, they weren't. They were impoverished farmers.
So, but you were moving around a lot.
Yeah.
Well, I know that is really challenging for children to keep starting again with new schools and things. But I think the benefits of those sorts of experiences are that you do see life slightly differently, I think.
Yeah. You try and see the world from their perspective.
Yeah.
Because you've got to understand what they're on about.
Absolutely, yeah. That's a very good point. And And I guess actors do that as well. You know, we're often trying to, even if you're playing the worst person on the planet, you approach the part as somebody's like, why would I do this? How did I get to be this person? Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good question. You said you wanted to ask.
No,
you sure?
I'm just fascinated to discover how you went back to, well, you didn't go back to education, you sort of went into it having not really had much, I guess. It was just an interesting story. Is that covered in your first book?
No, but it is very much the spine of my second book, the idea of this school, which actually had amazing things about it. It was just a bit over-ambitious.
Was it Steiner School?
It was Montessori, yeah. And I did then go and train as a Montessori teacher, because I do really like the system. It was just too much, this particular school, and it was very close to things not going well, and sometimes I've met people who went to that same school, and it was very difficult for them. So, but there were amazing things about it, and I hope that the book that I've written sort of shows both aspects of it. As you were saying, you know, there's obviously it's hard, it's challenging. There's things that you missed out on. I mean, I never forget going into a classroom with desks and a blackboard when I was 11, and I just didn't know what was going on. I'd read about that in books. I didn't think it actually happened, you know. But you do get another perspective on life, and possibly empathy. I hope so. Yeah.
Well, it's been a real pleasure having you here. Thank you so much, and all the best with your future projects, and hopefully you'll be back again.
Yeah, thank you, Adina. Thank you very much for having me. Lovely to see you all.
Thank you very much. I think we're doing some book signing. Thank you.